and talk to us. Gosh, my friendship with Joe goes way back to the early 1980s when Joe was representing the Carson City Sheriff's Office. I was representing the Douglas County Sheriff's Office at the monthly meeting of the International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators. And then we found out that, whoa, we both love history. And so that friendship really come together. Joe's one of those rare people who was born in Nevada. Can you believe it? Yeah. There we go. Let's see your hands. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, we went to school.
Yeah, a couple in the back. Joe's parents started, you may have read the newspaper article, started the Mark Twain Museum in Virginia City. And Joe has taken that business over after he retired as the assistant sheriff for Carson City. Joe is the fire chief for the Virginia City Volunteers up there now. He'd love to have you visit their fire museum and then come next door and visit the Mark Twain bookstore, right? And so Joe, when we talked about what he would like to do in a presentation on Virginia City, said, well, let's talk about some of the things that other people never talk about. And so you're seeing part of it up there tonight. And Joe is going to share with us part of his picture collection and the things about that. Joe?
Thank you. Well, I apologize first for the fact that our machine is not working with this fancy little remote. You can probably tell by my age that remotes and I don't get along really well. I need like a 10-year-old kid to accomplish that goal. What I have is an able assistant that's been working with me for the last 20 minutes trying to get the thing to work. But I appreciate that assistant. One of the problems that I have in terms of speaking to groups, particularly about the history of Virginia City, is I have trouble telling you my name in less than 30 to 40 minutes. So the information that I have to bring to you tonight about Virginia City is history material that I've been collecting and fooling with since I was about 10 years old. I started collecting some of these photographs. I have a photograph collection that definitely rivals that of the Nevada Historical Society as it relates to the Comstock, to Virginia City particularly. I have a plan in place in the next couple of years to produce a coffee table type of book of photographs that have never been published before. I have a collection of glass plate negatives that I've never even printed that relate to the Comstock. Stuff that is down in the mines, that is of the old mills, inside the mills, just stuff that no one's really ever looked at. And I love to just pore over these things and look at these things. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of these pictures in that respect. Now, as we go through these things, there's going to be some pictures you probably have seen in some sort of a location, and there's probably going to be a bunch of others that you likely have not seen in the past. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I noticed that we have a selected Virginia City resident that's come to help applause for me, I think, tonight. Roy, is that what? I appreciate that. Thank you. Either that or he's come to heckle, one or the other. So what I thought we would do is discuss tonight, and when they told me I only had about an hour, I go, an hour? I could go on for hours. But we'll talk, and we'll move fairly quickly, but we'll talk about people and how they got to the Comstock, and what was the method and processes, the people themselves, the businesses, the entertainment. How did these guys entertain themselves? Photos you've never seen, how we got to where we are today, and probably some oddball stuff about Virginia City and the Comstock. This will be comprised, as it says, about an hour of your life that you're going to never get back. So I hope that we have some material that you'll find interesting, and I'll certainly entertain any questions at particularly any point in time. So don't be afraid to interrupt me with a question other than where's the bathroom, and we'll go off and answer that particular question if we need to. If you could punch the button for me, please. All right.
So much for the hour.
Well, last time I used it, it was that button. It was the regular left click button.
Let's get out of this side. No, left click, regular. Let's try this.
There we go. All right, Bob already introduced me pretty much, so it just kind of tells you who I am and what I'm about. I lived in BC when my parents moved up there in '59. When Bonanza came on TV, and they opened up a couple of businesses up there. I've been the volunteer chief up there for 20 years. I'm also the Story County Emergency Management Director, and have been for about the last 5 years. I sit on the board of the Comstock Historic District, which I just got snookered into being the vice chair of. I'm the Virginia City Convention and Tourism Authority, the Comstock Firemen's Museum secretary, I own the Mark Twain bookstore. I have a graphics and sign company. Fortunately, as you can tell, the graphics and sign company has absolutely nothing to do with video stuff. And I'm a lover of Comstock history. I don't profess to be an expert on any of this material. I do have a love for it, and I do have a good collection, and I have a pretty good knowledge of most of the material. And I'm a collector of all things Virginia City. So if you have Comstock artifacts or something, don't leave them laying about in my presence. Next slide, please. And the next one. And a quick word from our sponsor. Now, if you need a ShamWow,
Oh, no.
we have those available after the talk. Forgive me, I love those ShamWows commercials. Here we go. How did they get there? How did these guys come to Virginia City? God, I don't push the wrong button here. Yeah, that's it. This may be a little bit difficult, but this is an original. This is a photograph I have of an original map that I have, and this is the Comstock region right in here, the Nevada border, the line right here, and we get down in here to Sacramento. As you're probably well aware, of course, they came over the northern route, they came over the southern, the kind of the middle routes over Lake Tahoe, and of course down over the Kingsbury area and down through the Monitor Pass area. They came here primarily from the mother lode interests that were there, 1849, and then 1859 they find gold in the mouth of Gold Canyon, the Genoa, Dayton area. Boy, I don't want to get into that Genoa Dayton thing. We'll all be in trouble. They started working their way up the hill, and they find the outcroppings of the gold that they eventually start going in under the hill. Next slide, please. From there, this is another map. This is also a little bit difficult to see. I thought it would be a little bit clearer, but here we go. This is Humboldt County, and then we get down into this small area, El Dorado, this area, and Nevada County, go out into Churchill. Let's go to the next slide. This is an overview that was actually hand done in 1860s, and kind of roughly showing the overview of Virginia City. These are actually reprinted now, and can be purchased in a number of locations. You may even be carrying them here, I don't know. But this shows Virginia City at that period of time as it sits on the side of the mountain. Of course, this being the west side, Mount Davidson being over here, this being the lower side, the 6 Mile Canyon direction. Slide. They got here looking like this. This is a taken from a glass plate negative that shows some miners roughly in the 1860s, and this is how they came. 3, 4, 5 guys walking along with their mule, donkey that had their material on it, and they arrived in over the mountains and however they needed to. Next. This is another one, glass plate negative, and these almost look like set-up slide situation, but these are real guys. These are the 1860s pictures, and of course, some of them are in pretty rough condition, and I put a lot of them through Photoshop and kicked them up and brought them into some better position. But you see, just like you might see in a movie, you got your gold pen, you got all your materials, your shovel, your pick, and his trusted donkey. You know, it was just he and his donkey, and that's how they arrived, looking just like that. Next. One of the primary ways that they came up through the area is they came up through the Silver City. Silver City lies right down in here. This is what's called Devil's Gate, and this is a toll house. Virtually every road going to Virginia City was a toll road, or going out of Virginia City was a toll road. And there were about 5 of them. There was a toll road, there was a Virginia City Truckee River toll road, which actually went north and went down, dropped down to what is now the Lockwood area, or Interstate 80, if you think of Interstate 80, east of Sparks, about 4 miles east of Sparks. This came up, this is what comes up Highway 50, down way down below, Dayton and beat over the on top of this hill here, and then came up here and paid the toll. The toll rates were something in the neighborhood, depending upon which road you came up, were in the neighborhood of about 5 cents a ton of material, or 5 cents for a walker or a rider, various different price factors that they had. And it was not an easy trek for them. It was hard work. These people, in the summertime, they had nothing. They had no air conditioning, keep in mind. In the wintertime, you did not have down coats. You had maybe a leather jacket. And it just, if you stop and think about this, and you think about how cold it's been out here the last couple of days, and you think they had no insulated boots, they had just leather boots, and think about the last time that you wore just plain old leather shoes when it was just 10 degrees outside, and how cold your toes got, and how difficult of a situation it must have been. This guy's got a freight wagon, and he's getting rid of this. The toll house is over here, right here, and this is actually an ore chute where he would be picking up ore from a mill that is just away back up on the side of the hill. Next chart. This is an overview look, and this is actually a later picture. But this is 6 Mile Canyon, Sugarloaf, Dayton Valley out here. And this is the 6 mile route that came up through Virginia City. This was a toll road also. Next. Here it looks from down in the 6 Mile Canyon up into Virginia City. This is roughly about an 1868 photograph, somewhere along in there. 1870s photograph. This is Union Street. In other words, so right here, for the guys here who would recognize this mostly, it would be the Bucket of Blood, the saloon. When your wife was shopping, you were probably in there. The St. Mary's Church up here. This is prior to the fire, so you don't see the same outline as you did before. But in front of this was actually a Methodist church, and here's the Episcopal church. So this is a truck farm. There was a lot of these guys as they came into the area, and at this point in time, you probably got 8,000 to 10,000 people in the community, in the greater area. They had to feed them somehow. They fed them by bringing beef and so forth from the Dayton Valley, from the Washoe Valley, from the Truckee Meadows, and from Carson Valley is where their beef primarily came from. A lot of their veggies as well. But they had truck gardens in Virginia City as well, which is what this is. This is a truck garden. This is another one. There were 2 dairies in Virginia City. One of the dairies, my house was actually built on the property where one of the dairies was located. And it's right next to where the old Chinatown was. When we built it, we found a lot of artifacts there in that immediate area. Next slide.
You also, when you said dairy, do they also have creamery there? Are they processed?
Yeah, I would say yes, because, and the reason I say that is because ice cream was a very popular thing up there. In fact, and I'll show you a picture later on where they were actually having an ice cream social as one of the entertainment forms. So yes, they had ice. Ice was actually manufactured by nature, of course, but they had reservoirs, several different reservoirs that they would, in the wintertime, they would cut the ice from the reservoirs, and then they would store it in what they call the ice house. And what it was you got all this ice, how do you keep this cold? Well, what is another major thing that they had to have on the Comstock in order to produce anything in terms of mining, milling, or whatever? they had to have wood. From wood, what do you get? Sawdust. And it's a sawdust is the item that they packed around the ice, and that's what kept the ice through the summertime. So they had all kinds of that.
The reason that I asked that question is my grandmother was the daughter of the person who had that tree.
Oh, is that right? Which tree were you reading?
I don't remember what the name of it was, but my grandfather lived in Vermont, Texas now.
Mm-hmm.
He used to take his milk to Creamery in Virginia City.
It was my fault. I turned off the switch, turned
Oh
on
my
the
goodness.
lights,
I
and
mean,
turned off.
do you have any photographs of that night? No? I may have a photograph. I'll have to look and see. I may have a photograph.
It's back on, projector.
Is it? It's warming up now?
Power.
We lose a breaker or anything?
There's power.
Oh.
Turn off the presentation.
Am I done? Are we going to the J&T now?
Bucket of blood.
All right, okay, yeah. The J&T's closer.
Probably
Yeah, that might be. The one directly in line here, the bottom one, the next one opposite that. No, about the food product. And I'll show you some pictures a little bit later. Well, possibly. I'll show you some pictures a little bit later of some of the kinds of businesses that were in the community. In that there was, if we're talking about beef, there were actually kosher butcher shops in Virginia City. If you talk about the culture of the makeup there, you're talking about the Germans, the Cornish, the Irish, the Welsh. We're getting there. The Welsh. There was a large Jewish community. It was large enough for them to even have their own B'nai B'rith society. So okay. I was gonna take you off the buying the beer list tonight. So this picture here depicts Virginia City in roughly. This is actually a later photograph. This is an 1880s, early to mid 1880s photograph. And if you look at it, here's St. Mary's Catholic Church, which currently has scaffolding all the way up to the tip top of the cross up there, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7 stories. And they have some of the dumbest people in the world working up on top there. Either that or they're highly, highly paid, because you never get me to go up there. It's totally covered with, they have a $2 million grant that they are restoring and restabilizing the steeple and so forth, and earthquake, seismically retrofitting the building. This is the St. Paul's Episcopal here, and this is taken after the church, the Methodist church that was right here, it has come down. It burned and blew down as a combination. You get back up in here, and you've got Piper's Opera House and the courthouse. Back up in here, International or Frederick House. No, I talked about that. I can take it back. That's not Frederick House. Frederick House is back down over here. There's another major rival. You'll see a picture of that. This is a school. First school. Virginia City was broken up into 4 wards, or 4 political districts. Wards is more of an Eastern term for political. We call them precincts. But at that time, they were referred to as ward. There was the first ward school, which was this north end. The second ward, which was kind of this central portion of town. The third ward was down in here, and the fourth ward was up here on the divide in this area in here. Consequently, the fourth ward school, which is still there, and you may have been in there or seen pictures of the fourth ward school. The second ward school was probably even more ornate than the fourth ward school. I have the only picture that I've ever seen and that I would have is a picture that shows maybe an eighth of that second ward schoolhouse building, and it was quite a fantastic structure, very, very pretty. A lot of people see that picture and they see this up in the little corner, and I think it's in here later that I'll point it out to you. But a lot of people, for some reason, think it was a brothel, and they keep mentioning it. And, oh, that's so-and-so's brothel. but it was a school actually. And the reason they say that is because in later maps it says it was female boarding, and it was female boarding. It was a boarding house at a point in time in the 1890s. Next slide. Okay, what do you have to have in every one? You got to have a post office. This is one of the first post offices. And this is some of the local people hanging around the post office, like they still do today, right? This post office was on C Street, the main street in town, and it was located more to the north end of town than anything. But the post office there was moved, and this is the first one. The second one was moved a little further down the street, and the third one is where the one is now currently is actually located in more up towards the center of town. The post office, like in any community, is used as a guidepost. In other words, well, go down the street until you see the post office, and then there's 2 buildings south of there. You know, everybody does that. Next slide. This is Gold Hill. And this is Gold Hill looking up toward Virginia City. Is up over the top of this hill. This is what's called the Divide. And originally it was called Middletown. And it was called Middletown because it's in the between Virginia City and Gold Hill. Now, at the time this was taken, Gold Hill was actually a city of its own. It was an incorporated city at that time. It had its own alderman for the community. It had its own police department. It had its own government, if you will, its own city make-up government. And Virginia City had its own makeup at that time. It was actually 2 separate communities. Today, they're just kind of all rolled into one. This is the Virginia and Truckee Railroad trestle. So that tells us this photograph is after 1869. This photograph is actually about 1872, 1873, somewhere along in there. And we can date that by the fact that there are certain buildings in certain locations here. This being one of the original old mines up there, one over here, well, it's tough to see them. I think it just escaped me. Which one that is? You may have heard the term Homestead, Fort Homestead. This was Fort Homestead. It was never a military fort, but it was called that. It was more of a park than anything. At the time they called it Fort Homestead, they were under the belief, all the residents of Virginia City and Gold Hill were under the belief they were going to be attacked by Indians. And so they established this fort. Now, if you remember the picture earlier of Devil's Gate in the toll gate, right above that would have been on that side of the gate, on the top of that rock outcropping, there was another little, if you want to call it a fort, it was more like they had piled up rocks around there, and it was to protect the gate for when the Indians would come in to prevent them from being able to get up to Virginia City. They also had that with the thought in mind that if the Confederates ever got up to that point, they'd have a way to defend the Devil's Gate there. You can see that there was a tremendous amount of people living in Gold Hill at that time. The vast majority of this later burned. Gold Hill had a major fire just much like Virginia City did in 1875. So it was a major event. This down here is the Crown Point Mill and workings down here. There's a number of mines along here. There's just down below us here is the Justice, and then there's the Kentucky, and a number of other mines and mills. This was a major community all of its own, with everything from its newspaper to its post office, banks, and you name it, they were there. Just like this. Here again, just a real rough picture. This is that same slide, but to show you about how 6 Mile Canyon is, and point out the fact that if you go right down in here, just right in that area there, was another little community called Flowery. And Flowery was actually a mining district, but there were about 500 people that lived down here in the canyon. And if you get down behind Sugarloaf here, or actually it's in front of Sugarloaf, excuse me, and you come back up here, that's what they call 7 Mile Canyon. Anybody ever been up into 7 Mile Canyon? Okay, did you ever wonder why it's called 7 Mile Canyon when it's like about a mile long?
Yeah.
Did you? Well, good for you. Here's the end. Okay, I thought maybe you could count. Here's the answer. 6 Mile Canyon goes from the Dayton Valley and comes all the way up to Virginia City, and that's 6 miles. Remember we talked about the routes coming into Virginia City? Well, the routes or the routes, depending on what kind of country you're from. As you came into Virginia City if you visualize the north end from Geiger Grade, it drops down into that 7 Mile Canyon area. That was another toll road that came in. Well, originally, what that road, where if you think of the paved road today, the 7 Mile Canyon Road actually went all the way out to what's called 5 Mile Flat, which is that flat dip area between north of Virginia City and going and drop down Geiger Grade into Reno. Well, if you there's two things that you can do. If you judge the distance from 5 Mile Flat down in through 7 Mile, which was a major route because they come in 7 Mile, come down here and up here to Virginia City. There was no northern route out of Virginia City in those early days. That would be 7 miles. The other way is also 7 miles. If you start from here and come up to the mouth of 7 Mile and go out to where it ends today, it's another 7 miles also. So that's where your 7 miles come from. We get a lot of questions. I've got this like 5 pages of questions that people ask us in the bookstore. Some of the world's dumbest questions. And I have some really favorite ones that people ask us all the time. They'll ask us, what does the V stand for on the side of the hill? Well, you got a D on the side of the hill here. They ask us, so what's the V stand for? So we'll tell them, oh, it's necessarily not a V, it's an arrow, and it points to the goal. They like that, or the better one, and it always garners just a blank stare, is we'll tell them, oh, the V, it stands for Reno. And they'll look at you, and pretty soon they'll go, oh, okay. It's hard to keep a straight face. There's a bunch of other ones. I mean, it goes on and on. The other one is people will come in the store and they'll say, "What this building used to be?" It's always been a building. Have you lived here all your life? Not yet. As far as I know, I'm talking, aren't I? Next slide, please. This photograph was taken in the 1880s, and this is that area that we called Middletown at that time. This is the Fulton Foundry, which was a foundry. They manufactured all the water, the fire hydrants that you found in Virginia City and Virginia City and Gold Hill. I don't know where Lake Tahoe came from. They manufactured, the steel poles that you see on the fronts of the buildings and porch posts and so forth. If you look down at the very bottom of them, you'll see 2 or 3 different titles. You'll see Union Iron Works San Francisco, some of them were manufactured there, or you'll see Gold Hill Foundry, or you'll see Fulton Foundry. And that's right there where they were manufactured, Fulton Foundry. Now this photograph, this is the Julia mine. And this is the Virginia Truckee Railroad coming into town on virtually the same track route as it does today. And we go on up to its buildings there. This is the Collar Mine. And of course the Collar Mine still exists as a tourist mine today. The structure, you can't really see it very well, but right back up in here is a reservoir. Actually, it's right over in here. There's a reservoir. And I don't remember if I have a picture of that in here or not. There's 90 of these pictures, and I hope we can get through them real quick. This I can say this is Gold Hill, right over the side of this hill here. This is Gold Hill. Bullion Ravine, and this is Mount Davidson right here, going on where the V for Reno is. And next slide, please. This is what's called the Nebraska. This is the earliest process by which they began processing the gold and silver, primarily the gold ore that they had. This is the Gould and Curry mill. This is in the mouth of 7 Mile Canyon. You go down 6 and it's right there at the mouth of 7 Mile Canyon. And as you can see, what they did is they put the old ore would go in these rounds. This is actually a Mexican process. It was devised by the Mexicans, and they showed them how to do this when they came into the area. And you put all your ore here and you run these mules over it, over it, and over it, and over it, until it crushes it down, breaks it down just from the weight of the mules walking on it and so forth. And then the ore was processed up here in the mill as it was crushed and broken down. Later on, the process they used was what's called stamps. And you may or may not have seen stamps, but and I don't have a picture of it, but stamps are just a series of pipes that are about 4 to 6 inches in diameter. They're just steel rods, or not steel, but iron rods, cast rods. And they're on a cam, and they were in usually groups of 2s. And the more common was anywhere from 4 stamps up to 8 stamps, or sometimes 16 stamps in the bigger mills. And they were on a cam, so that as the cam turned, by some process, either steam, which was the common process, that would develop steam and turn these cams, then these steel rods would just bounce up and down as the ore passed through underneath of it and crushed the ore. Next slide. This is in downtown Virginia City. Currently today, roughly right in this process where this sits today is where the Ramada Hotel is now. The new Ramada, which is just 2 years old. This is the Ophir Ore Works. Just to the north of this was the Ophir Hoisting Works, where the shaft went down in the ground. There was basically two kinds of shafts that went down into Virginia City. There was what's called a single shaft and a double shaft, and they were generally 10 by 10 for a single shaft or 10 by 20 for a double shaft. And the shaft, of course, had a cage that went down, and that's how the miners went down or came back up in those cages. Dangerous, super dangerous. They weren't closed in. There was no ocean then, so there was a lot of injuries, a lot of deaths, were very common. If you put your hand out a little bit, if your hand's caught between the wall of the shaft and the cage, rip off arms. People had heads ripped off, arms, legs, and it was pretty gruesome event. There was some instances where the cables broke and the cages would drop to the bottom. And how deep are we talking about here? We're talking about upwards to 2,500, 3,000 feet below the surface. Now, what's the altitude of Virginia City on C Street? Anybody know?
62.
6,200 feet. What's that the same as? Lake Tahoe, exactly. So if you think about the fact that it drops down from the surface there, 3,000 feet below the surface, what's the deepest point in Lake Tahoe?
1,600.
About 1,700 feet. So it's dropping down to 6,000 or 3,200 and some odd feet below the level of the surface. So it's twice as deep as Lake Tahoe, these shafts, these tunnels and mines that went down into the ground. You're halfway to sea level. That's a long, long ways down. Next slide. This is the Utah. This is up in 7 Mile Canyon. This was the Utah mine, and usually you can tell if it's a mine versus a mill because the mine is going to have a singular tall building that will be one. In this case, it's roughly 3 stories plus, and you'll have some large cupola on a smaller footprint building because that's where the head frame was located. And now you go around and you see a head frame that is exposed. In 1911, the federal government said these kinds of covered structures, covered head frame structures, they had to be daylighted. They could not have covered structures over those because of fire hazards and other kinds of hazards. They all had to be daylighted. So that's why you don't see the head frames enclosed in structures are remaining. There's a whole lot of reasons why there's nothing up there. And we'll talk about those briefly as we move on further on down. Yes, sir?
The head frame where the hoisting works is?
Correct. I'm sorry. I should have explained that. The question was, is the head frame where the hoisting works was? Yes, the head frame being that A-shaped frame where you'll see a big spool on the top for the cable to go in and to go down. That's what was inside this structure, inside that building.
Did they remove those to get rid of vapors?
Yeah, there was a number. There was the vapor problem, the vapors of all sorts of different things. Potential for fire, because if these things caught, if the structure caught fire, which was not unusual, if this caught fire, the potential for it to catch fire to the head frame and then move down into the shaft was significant. So that's why the government said they all had to be opened up. This is the Con Virginia smelter, actually, or the mill, and it was all combined into one thing. This one here had a head frame inside, and then you had processing on the outside. Now, if you notice here, there apparently must have been something going on here. They would stage these photographs, very often staged. You can see the wood piled up here. Now, where did this wood come from? Well, we all know it came from a number of places, primarily around various aspects of Lake Tahoe, from Lake Valley to Incline. And most of it would be either towed by one of the biggest towboats, was the Meteor at Lake Tahoe. They would tow it over to Glenbrook, and that's where their primary mills were. And then they had, from Glenbrook, they had a little small narrow gauge railroad that would pull it up the incline up to the summit, and then it would go down by flume. Or there was another flume process that went from Spooner Lake and then went down through Clear Creek to the bottom. Another flume, major flume, was the one right there, essentially where Kingsbury was another major flume line. That's what Kingsbury started out as a flume line. And then you've got, well, let's see over there, I guess this represents Joe's Beach, does it? No, I think that's over there. That's over there, yeah. But that's Clear Creek. And the thing that's interesting, if you look at those lines, you'll see that the end of all those flume lines, whether it be Kingsbury, Clear Creek, Kings Canyon, Ash Canyon, over Lakeview, Franktown, there was one that came down from Franktown, and another one that was Huffaker, which is kind of, there was Steamboat, and then there was Huffaker. It came out of Hunter Lake. And they all end right where the railroad is, right? So they just track perfectly, because that's where the railroad took it out. Next thing. This is an amazing picture because it shows two identically built structures. Actually, it's a stereo slide. But this is an original stereo slide as well. And it's kind of interesting to know this is one of the mill buildings in Gold Hill. Or not mill buildings, but mine structures in Gold Hill. You see this trestle area here. There was a mine that was right back up here, and as the overburden would come out on the cars, they would come out of the car, they would just dump it down here. Well, now this was built up and has since been graded away. It's right on the divide, going up into where Grinder's Bend is. And a lot of people call that Grinder's Bend, and that's not correct. It's Griner, G-R-E-I-N-E-R. And Grinder's Bend, the switchback just before you go up into Virginia City. How many people here have never been to Virginia City? Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. If you remember the switchback, that William Griner, he was a doctor. And he actually was one of the early franchise people to get a toll road up into that area. The other one being Geiger, William Geiger. And Geiger was what actually got the very first franchise to build the road. That was 1861. And he built Geiger Grade, and the legislature gave him a franchise. And that was built, and then it was improved in 1936, and widened and paved in 1936. To come up to Virginia City. Next slide. This is the Con Virginia Pan Mill and Hoisting Works. And here's the Hoisting Works, and here's the Pan Mill. And back here you can see St. Mary's right here in St. Paul's Episcopal Church. And if you look closely, if you notice here, right here, St. Mary's steeple is not there. Now, why is that? What happened in October of 1875?
Fire.
The fire. Do anybody remember the story of that St. Mary's was potentially going to burn? It would be a potential ability for it to pass the fire further into the community. And so, who was it that said, if you'll let me explode the roof off of St. Mary's, we'll save the walls, and I'll pay to rebuild the St. Mary's structure, and everything will be fine and wonderful again. Who was that?
Was it
John
McKay?
John Mackie. Exactly, John Mackie. He was a very philanthropic person, and he was a very hardcore Irish Catholic. And St. Mary's is Irish Catholic Church. And so this photograph was taken not too long after the fire, probably several years after the fire, 3, 4, 5 years after the fire, around 1980 or 1880, 81, and it still hasn't been quite completed. And you can see if you start studying the picture right here, again, you've got scaffolding actually on the back side of the picture. And there's another picture I have that's taken further down the canyon, and you can see the scaffolding even better yet. But that fire destroyed approximately 60% of the community. Next slide. This again is down in Gold Hill. This is the Crown Point Trestle. Remember the other picture we had was taken from up here looking back down this way. And this is after this picture, this mill was built specifically to process ore from the various mines. Now there's a couple of interesting stories about the mills and mines, and I'm kind of digressing a little bit here, but if you go back to the early history, the beginning as early as 1861, remember they find gold 1859, 1860, and in 1861, it's really beginning to develop as a corporate environment. Gold Hill, the Comstock was not an every man for themselves, panning for gold. First off, there was no water to speak of. So it developed as an underground corporate environment, and it was primarily financed by one man. Anybody know who that was? William Ralston. William Ralston was one of the founders of the Bank of California. And by roughly 1867, 68, he totally controlled the virtually 95% of all the wealth on the Comstock. He owned the mines and the mills. And if you think Enron was a manipulation of stock and so forth, Enron had nothing on Mr. Ralston. Now, what he did is he would buy and sell his own stock, and he would sell it to people at high, and then he would buy it back in the low times. And the way he would manipulate that was there's two things he would do. One, if a guy would open up a mill, he would prevent the ore from his mines to be processed by that mill, thereby essentially running him out of business, and then he would buy up that mill, so he would control it. The other thing he would do is when in one of his mines, they would find a bonanza of ore, a big pocket of ore, he would keep those miners down in the mine so that they couldn't come out and say, hey, we found a great big pocket of ore, and we're all going to make a lot of money. And so if you did that, the people would start buying up the stock and so forth, and he didn't want that to happen. Before he let them know there was a big bonanza, he wanted to be able to buy up as much stock as he possibly could so that he could sell it later at a big profit. 1868, along comes two guys. Who might those be?
Mackey.
And
Flood.
Fair. Mackey and Fair. Mackey and Fair were kind of partners in the mother lode in California. They come over, and Fair was pretty good, knowledgeable mining engineer kind of guy. He was a mineralogist, And Mackey was kind of the brains kind of guy. And they began noticing in the paper that the Hale and Norcross mine in particular would, when they had to find a bonanza of ore down there, Ralston would keep the miners down there, and they noticed in the paper and say there was a shipment of blankets, or there was extra food that went down to these guys down the mine. And they got curious. So they started developing a plan to begin to take over ownership of the Hale and Norcross, or to take up control of the Hale and Norcross. And the process by which they did that was they enlisted assistance. They knew they were going to have to do this by manipulating stock, and they were going to have someone on the inside in the San Francisco mining stock exchange. The two guys they incorporated into their little group to do this was Flood and O'Brien. Flood and O'Brien had been partners in a pub, a saloon in San Francisco, and they'd sold that business, and they'd made a fair amount of money, and they went into the stock brokerage concept. Well, it wasn't long before the four of them bought up enough stock to take control of the Hale and Norcross. About that same time, when they got control of the Hale and Norcross, what happened was the old management, which was William Sharon, who was a ruthless and unscrupulous to many degrees businessman, had levied an $80,000 levy against the stockholders to continue doing business, much of which he pocketed. And about the same time that Mackey, Fair, Flood, and O'Brien take this over, within about a month, they all of a sudden just happened to find a bonanza of ore. They happened to find it, I guess it was some kind of luck there to some degree, but the other reason is because of Fair's ability to analyze the quality of this particular mine when they began this takeover process. When they did that, they negated or turned around that $80,000 levy against the stockholders and paid it back to the stockholders. And then within about 6 months' time, they had paid another dividend of over $500,000 to the stockholders. So they were like, one, they had made a lot of money, and two, they were like the saviors. This is now 1869, 1870. So Mackey, Fair, Flood, and O'Brien now begin buying up everything else. And by 1875, they essentially put the Bank of California out of business, in Virginia City anyway. The Bank of California, William Sharon, pull out. They go back to San Francisco and do their business in California. And John Mackey and his Silver Kings or Bonanza crew, or however you want to term them, open up the Nevada Bank of San Francisco in 1875. It just happens that particular bank was in the building that I own in Virginia City. There's really not much there that tells you that, except if you go down in the basement, the vault is still there. The door's gone, but the vault is there. And I just use it for storing stuff in. But that bank then progressed and continued to flourish until 1890, when the Nevada Bank of San Francisco essentially goes out of business because Mackey sells it and just shuts it down, makes his money, and moves on. And the Bank of California comes back into the community and is there until the late 1920s, and then it goes away. It's like this is the Savage Hale and Norcross combination. This was a total boondoggle. This is the remains of this is on the side of the hill. Virginia. If we're standing here by this, Virginia City is off over here. So if you're in town over there and you're looking over here towards the side of the hill, you'll see the remains on the side of the hill. You'll see the foundational material of it is all. There's no structures over there at all. But you can drive right over to where that is. They summed that was the deepest, 3,260 feet below the surface, and really basically found nothing. unfortunately. That was kind of a boondoggle one. The Savage, Hale, Norcross, and Collar combination. Next slide. Here's from down below in kind of 6 Mile Canyon looking up towards Virginia City, roughly 1880. This is the Nevada mill. Is a milling process. Look at this cordwood stacked up here. There was over a 5-year period of time, there was something like 2 million cords of wood burned, just used for generating steam in Virginia City. There was 3-4 times as much as that was actually put down in the mines in order to use for square set timbering to hold the dirt back. This is what now is St. Mary's Art Center. Was a hospital, was a county hospital in the later time, but this was the Daughters of Charity, Catholic nuns were the ones that ran that hospital. This up here is the Oper. You saw it from another angle. And up here is the International Hotel, the Frederick House Hotel, which rivaled the International, but you never hear anything about the Frederick House. And it was always considered a lesser to the International Hotel, but it was every bit as big as the International. This is our street. Right over here now, and right here is Astoria County High School and football field, right here. For 8-man football. First time we've had that since 1944, I think it was. And if you go from here and you go straight up here, you go straight up Union Street. Union Street goes right past there, and then to C Street, and the bucket of blood again right there. Next slide. This is the CNC, the Con Virginia, and the Con Virginia, Consolidated Virginia, and California. 2 mines went together, and they consolidated their work to produce the ore from the 2 of them. They're very deep, start out as a shaft, and it goes back off of there. This is the Nevada Brewery. And this burned in 1983, I think it was. It was at that time, it was what we call the Yogi's house. There was a group of yogis, what do you call them? So it's sort of like what's the ones that were in the hospital, the Hare Krishnas? Kind of like Hare Krishna kind of guys. And they had a retreat up here. And there was, they didn't really understand electricity really well, I guess. And they had a million things plugged into one thing. And it burned in 1983. This area here is all built up now. There's all homes all along in here. This is, of course, all gone. This photograph is probably 1886, 85, 86. Sundown or Mount Davidson right here. Next slide. This is the California Pan Mill down the 6 Mile Canyon, looking up. And another one of these questions. I showed this slide to somebody and they go, how come there's no V up there? When you propose that V would have been there? You know, there's a bunch of stories about how these letters got on these mountains and so forth, you know, and there's several different stories as to it, and I won't go into those, but you know, it's like I had one of my sons convinced one time that, you know, the little labels on bananas that says Chiquita bananas. I had him convinced that those grew on there. They had this special process. Still today, he thinks, you know, that's amazing how they grow those bananas. You know, the guy's 40 years old and still thinks they're growing labels on those bananas. Next slide, please. They didn't have enough mills in Virginia City to process all of the ore, so they had to establish mills in other locations. Now, this is Carson City, just over the top of the hill. Carson City's landfill would be right back up in here now. And this is the Merrimack and the Brunswick mills. There were actually 17 mills all along this route. The Merrimack, the Brunswick, the Eureka, I can't even remember them all off the top of my head. And they were big mills, major mills. That was the primary reason that they built the Virginia and Truckee Railway, was to get the ore from the Comstock down to these mills. And they processed hordes and hordes of this. And this was all quicksilver, all mercury processing. And as a kid, we used to go out there. We used to fish in the river all the time. We take the fish home and eat it. And a few years ago, there was this big stink about the Carson River being a Superfund toxic river cleanup thing. I seem to be fine at this point. And then it had a little flavor. It was like pre-salted fish. I guess they did some testing, as I recall, and they determined that they could find no instances of deaths or injuries or sicknesses as a result of the fish eaten out of the river. And they finally realized that quicksilver, that mercury, just sinks down into the mud and so forth, so far that it really doesn't have any effect on anything. The other thing is cyanide, which is interesting. Is cyanide, which was later used as a process for milling ores. Cyanide actually leaches out of the ground. If it gets in the ground, leaches out of the ground in 12 years at any one given point. So cyanide is not a particular problem. They'll tell you, don't go playing in the sand piles down by the mills because it would have cyanide or other chemicals in it. And I suppose that's true, but here again, I've never seen any problem in Virginia City. No kid having a problem, or my kids never had any problem. I don't think. I should get a check. So they both became firemen, so maybe that's the problem.
They're still doing any mining?
I'm sorry?
They're still doing any mining up there in Virginia City?
Actually, yes, they are. There's two mining operations. One's fairly good sized, and the other one is a little small mom and pop thing, and it's actually below Silver City, just before you get to Highway 50. The major one is called plum mining, and if you're familiar with coming up through Silver City up through Gold Hill, on your left side as you come up, there's a big pit, and that pit has been reopened, and they're really taking ore out of there again. There's two things. Very good question. What happened to these shafts, and how many? Probably 150, 200, depending at different depth factors, anywhere from 15 or 20 feet to 3,260 feet. The really deep shafts, there's two things that happened to them. One, well, primarily what they did for the deeper ones that were more up close into town, around in the 1920s, they began trying to figure out how are we going to fill these in. So what they would do is they'd run old derelict car bodies into them. Remember, they're only 10 foot by 10 foot, these single shafts. And they'd bend these car bodies into them, and they'd get jumped in there and stuck in there, of course, down wedged in there. And then they would backfill it with dirt.
So then nobody knows what's underneath it.
Nothing underneath
Did
it.
they fill it with water?
Well, once they stopped mining any of these things, within 48 hours to 96 hours, the water would have come back up to would fill them halfway up again. Not all the way to the top. Although there are a number of springs around town that just kind of spring up. What happened, though, as you may have heard, on a couple of locations, we've had two different major shafts that have fallen in. One was directly in front of the elementary school, and that was maybe close to 7, 8 years ago now, I suppose, maybe longer. Time goes by when it's fun. But they fell in because of that very reason. And the one in front of the elementary school fell in, and the way the county figured is they went and they dug a trench around, or not a trench, but a shelf around it, put steel beams across it, and laid concrete slabs, and then filled it back over. So it never happened. They did this in about 6 weeks' time. But another shaft at the bottom end of one of the streets that fell in, and it actually was on BLM land. It was just off of the county area and into BLM land. The BLM, it took them 3 years to figure out how to do the same thing the county did in 6 weeks. And what they did was, instead of doing that process of putting a shelf on it and cover it back over, they just started dumping dirt into it. And they dumped dirt into it, dumped dirt into it, dumped dirt into it, and finally they were able to do something. I don't even remember what it was, and then finally they've got it kind of filled in, but it was right next door to the high school. We do get air shafts that fall in once in a while. But you know, I get a lot of questions from people asking, well, you know, did you ever see that movie, Paint Your Wagon? Is it Paint Your Wagon?
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yeah. You know, where the whole town falls in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't it make you nervous to live here? You know, might that happen? No. Because if you think about these mines and these shafts a little bit, you realize that these shafts, okay, they're 10 by 10 and they go straight down. The spider webbing tunnels, or actually, technically they're called adits, because a tunnel has to have light at both ends to be a tunnel. An adit only has light at one end, or has an opening at one end. Those things were really, when you get down inside there, those things are only about 3.5, 4 feet wide, the tunnels are, and they're only about 5.5 feet tall. It's really small and narrow in there. So I kind of equate it to like a wormhole in an apple. If you had an apple and it has a bunch of wormholes in it, and you squeezed it really hard, would that apple collapse? No, I've never seen that happen, but I don't know. You know, it wouldn't collapse because of the wormhole. Kind of the same concept. Where the problem might potentially lie, although I've never seen it happen, is when you get in those adits, in those tunnels, you have essentially a cavity. Think of a cavity like a cavity in a tube. The cavity opens up, and that's where they've taken out all this ore. How did they backfill that? Well, they did that with what was called the square set timbering. And the square set timbering is pieces of wood that are 16 inches by 16 inches by 8 feet tall. And it's a not tongue and groove, but a mortise and tenon process. And these things fit together, and they are blocks, and that's what holds the dirt back. Well, once that fills with water, if it fills back up and fills with water, then you've got the water pressure holding it back as well. So for that to all collapse, and here again, that starts at least 300 feet underground before you see any of that kind of thing at all. It doesn't come up to the surface. So there's really not much concern about that. The old timers around town really don't have much concern about that. They don't think about it. Now, there used to be lots of air shafts, and these air shafts, some of them are they're small, you know, 10, 15, 20 inches across, and they're usually pipes or tubes that come out of the ground, and that's what the air would go down and get the circulation going to get fresh air. Well, as a result, you know, many years ago, you know, that's where you dumped your oil when you changed your car oil. And, you get in trouble for doing that now, and if they catch you. But you know, that's where the kids throw sticks down and rocks down to see what you get. And there's still a few of those around, but those things are still there. Once in a while, something will open up, or you get a little sinkage. You just fill it in and continue. There's one guy's driveway that does that every once in a while. And so what he did is he just poured concrete over the top of it, and it sunk again, but the concrete just stayed there. So he didn't put the concern. Yeah. Next slide, please. And you know what? We're probably, you know, I can come on. This is Santiago Mill on Carson River. Slide. This is the Eureka Mill on Carson River. Next slide. And here's some of the guys. This is what I call a shift photo or a class photo. These fellas, these are fascinating to sit there and take one of these pictures. And this is a picture that's about this big. It's a hardback photograph. and to look at these guys. If you look at these guys, and you know, if you're into studying people at all, you look at these guys and you go, look at the hats that they're wearing, the style of hats, and kind of look where they're placed on their heads. This guy must be he must be a heavy-duty guy. He's got on a tie. He must be one of the bosses.
Nobody's smiling.
The what?
Nobody's smiling.
No, nobody's smiling. That's kind of interesting. Of course, at the time these kind of photographs were taken, that was pretty much the norm. You didn't smile for photographs at all. Look at the clothing they're wearing. It's dirty. It's disheveled. Now, usually they had, much like the coal mines today, they would come up out of the mines on their shift, and they worked like 12-hour shifts. They'd come out and they had changing rooms, so they could change into some nicer clothes. But and this is obviously their work clothes. Look at their boots; they're not very good condition. You see the candle holder. Every man had his own candle holder you see them all right here. You had their own candle holder. And see right here is a lunch pail. You got one right here. Right over here in this cabinet is a lunch pail. We're having, of course, Virginia City's sesquicentennial is this year. 1859 to 2009, 150 years. And no, I wasn't there at the beginning. We're going to do one thing. We're going to have no, I got to get this right. Pasties cooking contest. You have to be careful because the other option is pasties. And we're going to have we're going to have a contest and sale for pasties, and that's a Cornish meat pie, essentially, if you're not familiar with that. And these guys would make those at home. They would put hot water in the pans, and in this top portion would be hot water, and then you keep that in there, and it would keep their food fairly warm, relatively warm. They would usually, down in the mines, they would put that near maybe a steam fissure that would be coming out of the ground, pretty common, or a hot water leak, and it would keep their food warm. Sometimes they'd wrap it in paper, and put it inside their shirt or in their pants, and that would help keep it warm too. My wife makes pasties every once in a while, and we have them for dinner, and they're wonderful. It's sort of like a Cornish burrito, I guess you could say, if you would. Next picture. That should be another picture. Look at these guys. These are some hardcore guys. Here's old Pat Conway, and Franklin Buck, I think is who that is, if I remember correctly. This one, Pat Conway, is fascinating. I had this picture hanging up in our store. It's still hanging there, just for people. And I had some guy walk in here, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago and go, "That's my great grandfather." He said, "Are you kidding me?" No, I said, "Prove it." He had people walk in the store all the time with all kinds of records and so forth that they're looking for other information. Where did my great grandfather live? Where was his store? This sort of thing. And I have all kinds of. I have city directories. Every city directory that Virginia City ever made, all the way back to 1862. And so I can look up all this stuff. And these things are in pretty sad shape, actually, most of them, because they've been so used. So this guy says, well, he lived on such and such a street. We looked it up. There's old Pat Conway. It was his grandfather. And he had this sheet of papers, and he had a picture that was, he's all dressed up and nice and so forth, but it was obviously the same guy. And I have that happen every once in a while. But look at this. This picture is a little bit older than the first one. And I meant to pick up one of these lanterns and bring it with me. These are called Chenette lanterns, or sometimes they call them Grant lanterns, because there was a famous picture of President Grant that he took a picture with him holding one of these lanterns, and so they call them Grant lanterns. But it was manufactured by a man by the name of Chenette in Virginia City. And those lanterns, if you find an original one now, they're around $2,500 if you can find an original one. The funny part of this is quite a few number of years ago in our basement, I found all the remaining parts that when Chenette died in 1906, of all the remaining parts that he had for making those lanterns. And so I could if I wanted to burn the heck out of my fingers doing the soldering, I could make up probably 100 of those lanterns, and they would be the same as they were made at that point in time. Next slide, please.
Question?
Yes, question.
When men used to do individual placer mining, the dream was always to get rich, strike it rich.
Yes.
These guys were mostly union employees probably, or just grunts. But still the wages must have been enough to keep them doing that rather than a safer job somewhere else.
You're absolutely right. That's a very correct observation. First off, the mining industry or the mining unions were essentially founded in Virginia City. That's where mining unions began. And yes, they were represented by unions. There was a miners' union hall in Virginia City. There was a miners' union hall in Gold Hill. And they were very close-knit situations. These guys were the highest paid miners in the mining industry in the entire world at that time. They received $4 a day. The average pay was $2 to $2.25 a day. A lumber mill worker up at Lake Tahoe in that same period of time would get paid by the number of cord of wood that they could cut up. And they would get paid 25 cents per cord of wood they cut. How many cord of wood can you cut by yourself in one day? These guys worked 12-hour shifts. They lived in an environment where they might have lived in a boarding house, they might have had their family home, but if they lived in a boarding house, it's a good likelihood that the boarding house that they lived in was what they call a 12-on, 12-off boarding house. And what they would do is they would only rent that room in that boarding house for 12 hours. Now, if you worked the graveyard shift, then you got the room from let's say 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then your room went to the guy who rented it from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. because you were at work, and when he was sleeping, and he was sleeping, and when he was at work, you were sleeping. So you only rented that room for half of that 24-hour period of time. That was pretty common. Now Twain made a comment about when he was there, Mark Twain, and he said in his book Roughing It, he said the walls were so thin that because they were made out of muslin, he said the wall, oftentimes canvas are just muslins that separated this. So the walls were so thin you could hear the ladies changing their minds. Next slide. This is taken down, and this is one of the very few that you'll ever run across that is a picture of down inside the mines. Now, I have a whole bunch of pictures showing down inside the mines, but of the equipment that's there, not very many of them with the men doing something. This ore cart is wood. The later ones were all metal, but these are wood sides and with metal corners on them and metal slats to hold them. But I've only ever seen one other wooden ore cart outside there and actually have it in our building. You just don't see them. But these guys, remember the camera was invented in 1831. And so by 1860s, 1870s, the camera process is pretty well along. It's still pretty basic to take a photograph. I mean, it's hard work because they had to take a piece of glass, they had to put it into a chemical, and then they had to keep that piece of glass with the chemical on it wet until they could get it to their camera. And then they would take that picture, and then they had to get that back without any light hitting it. They'd get it back to their dark room, wherever it was. Sometimes it was in a wagon, sometimes it was in the structure, and you could then take a picture. You know, I don't even know what number slide we're on at the thing, but I know we're, so here you asked your question about the miners' union. Here's the miners' union hall, and in Virginia City, it has since been restored. This picture was probably taken in the 1930s, and it has since been restored. And they had the miners' union hall originally 1800s had a library. a library that had all the latest books, everything from Shakespeare to Deadwood Dick's mining or Western Adventures magazines and what have you. And every once in a while, you might go to a garage sale or you'll go to an antique shop and you'll find an old book and you'll open it up and it'll say Virginia City Miners Union Hall. And you'll find them every once in a while. They're out there. Next slide. Piper's Opera House. How do they entertain themselves? Piper's Opera House. With the opera, with a myriad of different things, how they entertain themselves. Piper's Opera House was one of. This is one of the earliest Piper. This is the second Piper's Opera House. This one burned in 1875, and then the third one is the one that actually. Well, let me back this up. Technically speaking, this would be the third Piper's Opera House, because the first one was he bought an opera house from John McGuire, and then he turned it into Piper's. Then he goes up and he puts the Piper's Opera House up here. It burns in 1875. It gets rebuilt, and this is what he rebuilds. This one burns again in 1885, and what's there now is what was rebuilt after 1885. John Piper burned his third one, his other one down accidentally after a performance when he left a cigar burning in his apartment, so he burned it down himself. Next slide. Oh, that's inside Piper's Opera House. Here's an interesting thing about the cultural aspect, and these guys weren't in Piper's Opera House. But can you flip? I don't know if you can. Yeah, can you? Is there a way to go back? I just wanted to point something out. This fellow down here, this is one of the few pictures you'll see of African American on the Comstock anyplace. Obviously a worker, stagehand at Piper's Opera House. Next slide. They had a band. They had various sizes. This is 4 members of a band. You got a trumpet, looks like a couple of violins and a bass. Must have been some wonderful music, probably early rappers. Next slide. Baseball, big thing. Had baseball in Virginia City. This is Comstock, right here. Virginia, BC, Virginia City. This is actually this photograph is about 1890. And they were members of a town team, and they would play Reno, Carson, Gardnerville, or Carson Valley area here. They travel all around. Next slide. Here's your ice cream social. This is in the Armory Hall. This was a National Guard hall. The National Guard had 3 different units there. You had the Washington Guard, the Emmett Guard, and the third one escapes me. Guard. But anyway, there were 3 National Guard units. And this was very common in the National Guard building. The National Guard building fell down in the 1940s due to snow load. Here's the Emmett Guard parading on B Street. Now, if you've ever been to Virginia City for a parade, all the parades go from south to north on C Street. In this period of time, 1870s, 1880s, this is B Street. And they come from north to south on B Street. Because B Street was one of the primary commercial areas. It wasn't C Street so much. It was B Street that was the primary commercial. This structure right in here is the back side of what is now what you see is the Washer Club on the C Street side. International Hotel. And just up from here was a stock exchange. And there was also a small stock exchange telegraph located in this building, but on the front side, on the C Street side. This is Company B, Emmett Guard. Next slide. This is the flume. This is the flume ride. This is a really fun picture. And there's documentation where these idiots would get up there and ride this. I mean, this was the first roller coaster, I guess. This is on Clear Creek. And to show you that our politicians, not to demean any particular politician, are not any smarter today than they were then. This is Governor Reinhold Sadler, as you can see. Nothing to hold on to. Whether in thinking, I wonder if I'll live through this. And you see, the only thing holding him back here is a piece of wood. So when this guy lifts that piece of wood up, it's hell bent for leather to Carson City. Look at this lady back here with her parasol. She's gonna soil her pants in about a minute. Back here too, look at these parasols back here, and these ladies back here, and the only thought that came to my mind, I'm thinking, I wonder if they really actually went ahead and did this, or if this was just staged. But this almost looks like, this guy here, I've wondered, there's no way to be able to really tell, or I guess there is, actually I could. But this guy to me looks like he could be actually one of two people. But I think there's a possibility this could be John Mack doing some looking at various things. Look at the condition of the clothing this guy's got. A long coat, he's got he's got a nice shoe on there, he's got nice pants on, a waistcoat, a shirt, top hat. This guy is obviously the ringmaster. And he's probably standing there going, he had to wear the long coat because he probably got the pockets filled up with quarters that these doofuses paid to go do this, right? Now, how many by a raise of hand would go do this? With nothing to hold on to?
I want to be in the center because it looks like he's got all these posts and it starts to bend and he's reached out and you're going to lose an arm or something.
Probably so, yeah, good bet, yeah. And if you did want to do this, I'd probably talk to your wife first and say, what kind of insurance you got? Next slide. Here we are kind of get into these businesses. I'll try to move faster. I hope I'm not boring anybody.
Great. I'm Joe.
Okay, I figured we probably were. Okay, we'll flip through a couple here. This is just to show you here that the kinds of businesses. You got lumber mills. You've got the Virginia Public School is another school here. All these businesses. Look at this little thing here. Let's go to the next slide. Looking up south on C Street. This is where those in the Skilligan Mott Company is where those lanterns were made. This building right here is where the Mark Twain bookstore is. That's our building right there. It was built in 1862. This structure here is where the Territorial Enterprise Museum and so forth is currently housed. Right there, next slide. Fourth Ward School, you've all seen that. They were built for 1,200 students. First Ward School on the north end of town. Next slide. This is a livery stable that was actually in the building that we own, that we have, with the bookstore right over here to this side. And over here is what's now the country cupboard. And I filled this in with a set of nice double doors. And that used to be a big sliding door. Down in the basement is the stalls for the horses and so forth. Next slide. This was a mortician. This was Kitzmeier Kinney. And Kitzmeier did have a drugstore, and then Kitzmeier later moved to Carson City and had Kitzmeier drugstore in Carson City. If you're around are familiar with that, next slide. This is the meat market. This was Ziegler's kosher meat market. Next slide.
You know, those buildings were still crooked back then.
Yeah, that's right, they were. You think that happened just recently? This is what is today is the Warsaw Club. It is exactly the same doors are still on the Warsaw Club, still there. This is what's in what's called the Douglas Building. This is Wertheimers, cigars, tobaccos. This is not a real person, and this is in here. Yeah, you can tell by the wheels, yeah. That's a really wheelchair. Next. Wells Fargo. Did you know Wells Fargo started in Virginia City? Started in Virginia City. Wells Fargo First Bank is in Virginia City, right here. Our building is right down here. And this is a few buildings up. The Wells Fargo stage getting ready to leave. Next slide. Wells Fargo, right there. Fell down in the 30s, or 40s, excuse me. Next slide. Vogel's Books, stationery. And up the street from where we are now. Next next slide. Hatch Brothers Groceries and Provisions, they were they were the Smiths of their time. They had like 3 stores in town, Hatch Brothers did. Next. Convoy's Coffin Ware Room. They were also furniture manufacturers. Coffin people and undertakers, you see undertakers right there, were also manufactured furniture. Next. This is Lanyo's Virginia City Coffee and Spice Company. Abel Lanyo and his stepbrother August Bohabin. Abel Lanyo was killed in a robbery. He's buried in Virginia City. And Bohabin later then sold the business and went back to France, where they came from. Their relatives walked into the store one day and brought this picture to me from France. Didn't speak English. I didn't speak French. It was fun. Next. This is anybody of you from years back go to the Crystal Saloon? Crystal Bar? Yeah, many years ago. This is when the Crystal Bar was in where the Washoe Club is now. This was prior to Washoe that Crystal moved to its current, or what was its current location, now the Visitor Center, in 1936. But this is the Washoe Club, when it was at that point in time. With this Washoe Club now, this is the Crystal. Next slide. And the California Brewery, this is another brewery. This is right now the middle school gymnasium is located here. And right behind it is the Fireman's Museum on C Street. This is D Street. Next slide. We already showed that. International Hotel, Stage Company. Next slide. This is another view of the International Hotel. Next. This is the backside of the International Hotel. This is the backside. This is D Street. This is the corner of the Piper's Opera House. Next slide. This is the International Hotel, the morning after October 1914, when it burned. Next slide. This is Frederick House on D Street, International Hotel, and Frederick House. You can see this was a 4-story, a 5-story facility on the backside itself. A couple of cobblers in here, and Bucket of Blood over on the, well, this is obviously a stereo part, but the Bucket of Blood building where it's on this side of the, this is Union Street. Next slide. Sutro. We won't get into Sutro. We can maybe do that at another time and talk about it. Maybe come back another time and talk about some other things. But I think that we've really kind of gone on a long way here, and I really appreciate your participation and your attention. You've been a great bunch, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to kind of provide some of this information to you. And I'll entertain a few quick questions if you so desire, or afterwards, or whatever. And at this point, I'll turn it back to